Morning. If you are in the United States, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this GMF conversation on the U.S. presidential election and its implication for the future of Turkish-American relations. My name is Kadri Tastan. I am GMF-TOBB Senior Fellow with the GMF here in Brussels. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please let me first to thank also to TOBB, the Union of Chambers and Commodity Exchange of Turkey. We have a partnership with the TOBB, and this online event is a part of series of events organized as part of GMF-TOBB Fellowship on Turkey, Europe, and global issues. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19, we are trying to come together virtually to discuss some of the most important issues, and today's focus will be on the future of Turkish-American relations under Biden administration. Obviously, the world was impatiently waiting for the result of the U.S. election, and no doubt Ankara was probably one of the capitals that awaited the result with more anxiety, because the American-Turkish relations are challenged by many contentious issues, and clearly the choice of Trump or Biden would have quite different consequences for these relations. So it's with my guests, we will speculate a bit on the future of these relations under Biden administration. And then we will open up, of course, to all of you to take your question to our speakers. So obviously there are a lot to discuss. And for this, we have a really excellent speakers. Please let me first to introduce them. We have Gonul. Gonul is the Executive Director of Turkish Studies Center at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Then we have Ian. Ian is the Vice President of GMF and also the Executive Director of GMF Brussels office. And our third speaker is Ozgur Unluhisarcikli. Ozgur is the Director of the GMF in Ankara. So thanks to all of you for joining us today. Well, before giving the floor to our speakers, I would like to just remind you that this is on the record. And if you like to put a question, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we will keep track of them, and we will get as many of you as we can, of course. Please specify also that to whom you are also asking your question. With that, I will start the discussion, and Gonul, I would like to start with you. You have 6-7 minutes. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks to the GMF for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to take part in GMF events. Ozgur is doing a great job leading GMF in Turkey, and the Brussels team is great. So thank you so much. I see two scenarios, Kadri, playing out in Turkey-US relations. One is bad, the other one is worse. And I'll start with the second. Biden obviously is in an unenviable position. He won the presidency, but Republicans most likely will retain control of the Senate, which means Biden will not be able to pass serious domestic legislation. And this is happening at a time when expectations from the Biden administration are high. The country is facing several existential challenges at home. And that means Biden could turn to foreign policy where he has more latitude and room to present success stories. And in this scenario, a Biden presidency will be a lot tougher on Turkey, which has drawn bipartisan condemnation from lawmakers. And that means applying the most damning of Cancer Sanctions and a stronger criticism of Turkey's human rights records, lack of rule of law and all that, and not refraining from clashing with Turkey when policies diverge. So obviously this is the least desirable scenario for Turkey. The second scenario is more nuanced. In this scenario, Biden still struggles with a Republican Senate or not, but his top priority is domestic problems, which in my opinion will drain much of his administration's energy, political capital, and the country's resources. So here we can expect a more pragmatic Biden administration than we would see in the first scenario. And this is in no way to suggest that Biden will tolerate Turkey's operationalization of the S-400s, for instance, but might pick more symbolic sanctions over more severe ones. And given how much emphasis Biden has put on building democracy and democratic institutions, both at home and in the world, a Biden presidency will for sure look a lot different than the Trump administration, which cozied up to the autocrats across the world. So we will hear louder criticisms of Demirtas or Osman Kavala''s imprisonment, for instance, from the highest levels under a Biden presidency, instead of the meaningless State Department statements that express grave concern over these things. And if you look at his regional agenda, Biden is expected to be a lot more engaged in Syria. He'll be working a lot closely with the Kurds and will not be as tolerant towards Turkey's military adventures in northeastern Syria. In places like in Eastern Mediterranean, even Trump administration was very critical of Turkey's policy there. So we can expect Biden to pursue a similar strategy. In Libya, for instance, currently the diplomatic process is working there. As you know, there's a ceasefire, and that seems to be holding for now. Biden was very critical of Obama administration's decision to intervene in Libya. So he is as risk averse as Obama, I would say, but then came Trump, and the US was completely absent in Libya. So I expect Biden administration to be more involved now in Libya, now that the diplomatic process is underway. And it will probably support the multilateral effort to end the conflict. And if Turkey spoils these efforts, these multilateral efforts, I think Biden administration will take a clearer stance against Ankara's policy there. But I still see opportunities for Turkey and the US to work together. Maybe not within the framework of a strategic alliance, but more on a case-by-case basis. Biden is expected to pursue a very tough policy vis-a-vis Russia, right? He thinks Russia poses the biggest threat to US national security interests, as well as its allies in Europe. And remember, when he was the vice president, he worked actively to support pro-Western leaders in Ukraine. And that means that Biden will work closely with European allies to curb Russia's aggressive behavior, and that could be an opening for Turkey. The critical point here is where Turkey will stand on these efforts, and the latest decision to test S-400s is not a great sign. Biden is also likely to revise Trump's approach to regional countries like Israel, like Egypt, the Gulf, and US stance on the war in Yemen. And these changes, in a funny way, will bring the US closer to where Erdogan stands. For instance, Biden will not call Sisi, refer to him as his favorite dictator. And I don't expect Biden, but still, I don't expect him to terminate that 1-point-something billion stipend to Egypt, because he still thinks that Egypt is important and has to be supported to secure the security of the Suez Canal, but he will not be as cozy to Sisi as Trump has been, and that could make things a little less uncomfortable between Turkey and the United States. And Biden is also, he's a very pro-Israel leader. He will not condition US support to Israel on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, as suggested by some people in his circle, but he will not tolerate the expansion of settlements either. He will discourage the Israeli annexation of West Bank, which was encouraged by Trump, as you know. And that is also a slide that could, again, remove one of the problematic points in Turkey-US ties. And he's also likely to reassess US ties with the Saudis. As you know, there's been a lot of debate in the Congress. It's been pushing for a tougher approach, particularly after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. So there is a debate in the Congress about the arms sales to Saudi, calling out on the Saudi leadership on the human rights issues, and of course the war in Yemen and where the US stands there. So this is a huge debate, and I think Biden might go along with some of those proposals. But I think one of Biden's top priorities in the region is going to be the fight against ISIS. And Turkey is an important actor there. Unfortunately, Biden's top foreign policy team has bad memories. They remember the days when Turkey dragged its feet in allowing the US use of Incirlik in the fight against ISIS. But a lot has changed in the way Turkey sees ISIS. So I see an opening there. The two can certainly cooperate there. And let me end with this. In every administration, there is a camp that says, let's not lose Turkey, let's work with Turkey. Even under Obama administration, at a time when Turkey was refusing to help the US-led coalition in its fight against ISIS, even when Obama was entertaining the idea of providing weapons to the YPG, there was a camp in the US administration that said, let's not go that far. We cannot afford to lose Turkey. He ended up not listening to that camp, but there was a camp. So we often talk about how Biden's top foreign policy team includes people who have bitter memories, who have worked with Erdogan during a tough time, and how they will shape the entire outlook to Turkey. But I still think that there is still a camp that will say, okay, the campaign is over and we have to work with Turkey. There will be different camps. One camp is going to say, you know, Turkey understands only the language of force. So this is a critical, vulnerable time for Erdogan. So we have to pursue really tough sanctions, and that's the only way that he will change his behavior. And there will be another camp that will say, let's not go that far. So with that, I know the picture is very complicated, but that's how I see it. So I think in the second scenario, despite all the problems that we will see, there will still be areas where the two countries can cooperate, and I'll end it there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gonul. It was great. You know, you gave us a great picture. You touched all the topics, and now I would like to go to Ankara and to ask Ozgur how the things look from Ankara. Go ahead, Ozgur.
Thank you very much, Kadri. But Gonul just broke our agreement because she had promised that she would be merciful and leave some points for us to make, but she hasn't left too many. So perhaps I will be paraphrasing her in most of what I say. I'll speak in three different parts. First, I'll talk about personalities and politics. Then I'll talk about policies, and then third, I'll talk about some, let's say, lesser known things that are going on in Ankara. Let's say on personalities. First of all, we must talk about the Erdogan-Trump relationship, which was indeed based on mutual liking. I mean, people have always agreed, have always discussed why Erdogan and Trump had this close relationship. My answer is they indeed genuinely liked each other. With Biden, the situation is going to be very different. They do not like each other, and Biden has actually made this explicit in his public comments. But apart from liking or disliking, of course, Biden is going to be a more institutional president. So even on issues that he agrees with Erdogan, he may refrain from acting and leave the issue to institutions or the Congress. So we will not see a US president who is shielding Ankara from the anger that has been building in Washington. Then, of course, there are some personalities, persons that we do not know yet, who will be extremely important. Those will be the secretaries, and particularly the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense that Biden will appoint. Because given his age, Biden will probably delegate more than a usual president, and his vice president, Kamala Harris, is not really a foreign policy person. So probably he will rely on his secretaries to take over the job. And who they are will play an important role in overall US foreign policy and also in relations with Turkey. Then there's a team, the wider team that Trump will bring into the administration. We don't know who they will be, but we can already assume that some of them will be coming from the Obama administration, whom Ankara has been scapegoating for the last 4 years. Actually, some of those individuals could be from among those that lost their jobs because of Turkey's policies, and they could come back with a vengeance. And then there is the fact that actually the Senate will be from the opposition party. I mean, a Republican Senate kept on hold sanction packages against Turkey because there was a Republican president. I wonder if a Republican Senate, assuming that the runoffs in Georgia don't change the situation, a Republican Senate would hold those sanctions packages against Turkey when there is a Democratic president. And then, of course, there's the issue of now policies, which Gonul has mentioned. I believe that Syria will be key, and I agree that actually the Biden administration will actually have a very different approach to Syria compared to the Trump administration. But also, let's not forget that some of what's done cannot be undone. And during the Obama administration, there was one assumption in Washington that Turkey was not fit to do the job that needed to be done against ISIL, that Turkey basically did not have the capacity, capability, willingness. I think Turkey has already disproved this during the last couple of years. So I would take that with a grain of salt. On issues such as East Med, Cyprus, etc., again, I think there is no question that the Biden administration will be more assertive and put more pressure on Turkey compared to the Trump administration. I think this time around, not East Med, but Cyprus may be extremely important because Turkey is preparing or signaling to take certain steps in Cyprus away from the one-state solution towards a two-state solution, or perhaps to a confederative solution from a federative solution. And unless there is a process in place, Ankara may move forward with those plans. So I think that on the one hand, it's very important that Washington plays a role in launching a new initiative, but also most likely the Biden administration will be more pro-Greek than pro-Turkish, which could also create some tensions. Now, on other issues like Russia will be crucial, as Gonul mentioned, and it's actually interesting, an opportunity again for Turkey, but it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, Turkey could be very instrumental in containing Russia. Everybody knows this. On the other hand, if one of Biden's priorities is containing Russia, it means that it then becomes more likely, even from that perspective, that Cancer Sanctions are imposed on Turkey, not only to punish Turkey, but also to deter other countries from cooperating with Russia. So that issue, I think, becomes very important, and how Turkey approaches Russia will be one of the key determinants of Turkey's relationship with the United States in the upcoming future. Then there is the issue of Iran, which is actually in Turkey's favor, given that the Biden administration will try to create a new, let's say, JCPOA. It means that there will be less pressure on Turkey to join containing Iran, which is good for Turkey. Another thing is, of course, the Biden administration will be very pro-democracy. Biden has already announced that he will call the Democracy Summit, which should be concerning for Turkey, given the democratic backsliding in Turkey. But it should also be concerning for some of Turkey's adversaries in the region, because they are not more democratic than Turkey. So at least in that issue, Turkey and its adversaries in the region are in the same boat, and maybe that can even bring them together. Probably not. Then three issues that I think are extremely important that are overlooked in the West. So the first issue is Erdogan's concern, genuine concern, that the United States has a plan to remove him from office. So this dates back all the way to the Gezi protests in 2013. But we also know that Erdogan keeps the United States accountable for the 2015 coup attempt. And his words on these issues are not for domestic political consumption or just rhetorical. He believes that the United States or some circles within the United States want to remove him from office. The problem is Biden has already said on the record that he will work actively to remove President Erdogan from office, not through a coup attempt or anything, but through cooperation with the Turkish opposition. Imagine how Erdogan listens to this and evaluates this. So the second issue is the Cancer Sanctions. I mean, people generally assume that President Erdogan would be deterred by these sanctions. But depending on the timing of the sanctions and the content of the sanctions, he could turn it into an advantage. And he knows this. If the sanctions are imposed just before an election, he could use this as a rally around the flag moment to go to early elections. And he can actually choose the time of the election. So the conversations about sanctions in Washington are not heard in a terrifying mode in Ankara, I must say. So let me stop here for the time being. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm sorry, just one more aspect that is very important, which is the self-fulfilling prophecy. I think there is a gloomist or gloomist, fatalistic approach to this that I also just portrayed. But actually, the relationship could start in a negative mood just because people expect it to go bad. So like my modest suggestion to Ankara and Washington would be to give a chance to a positive beginning and see where things evolve.
Thank you so much, Ozgur. Ian, over to you. Please give us your thoughts on the U.S. Turkey relations, but you are based in Brussels. It would be great if you could bring also the European dimension to the discussion. Over to you. You are muted, Ian.
Kadri, thank you very much. And you know, now I really have a problem because everybody has said very interesting things. I agree with almost all of them, but that's usually the case in these things. But maybe I'll try to give a little bit of a twist to some of these points. Really just three things. The first, I think, and Gonul, you were right to start out this way. I mean, it's when we think about the future of the relationship, which has always been extremely difficult to manage. I mean, those of you who followed this know that. Even in the really good years, it was not easy. But when you think about this, it's important to keep this broader frame of, you know, what is a Biden foreign policy going to be like in mind, and what is he likely to be like as a president? I actually think that yes, there will be these enormous domestic distractions, COVID and the economy and other things. That's key. But you know, Biden could well prove to be the most foreign policy minded president that we have had since George H.W. Bush. Now, there have been others that had foreign policy forced on them as a kind of priority, like George Bush, the younger, after 9/11. But you know, really, you have to go back some ways to a period when an American president took such an active interest in it, had spent so many years around it, liked it. Obama, for all of his policy interests, didn't have foreign policy at the top of his agenda. He was interested in other things, like more generally speaking. This won't be true for Biden. You know, I think if Biden has the opportunity to insert himself in this foreign policy agenda, he could be very activist. And of course, he'll bring in people who are, and we've already spoken about this, very much the known world in a sense in terms of the American foreign policy elite, maybe a more diverse one, but still people drawn from that kind of expertise. It's all been mentioned already. I mean, a greater attention to democracy, human rights, media freedom, that whole agenda, which will influence the relationship with Turkey, but also influence the relationship with a number of third countries where we both have a stake, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Russia. NATO. I mean, this is likely to be a far more NATO-centric administration, and one that takes a much more positive view of the European Union as an actor. Now, that can have implications for the relationship with Turkey as well, because there is a kind of trilateral dimension here. There are many things that are very difficult in the security realm between the United States and Turkey, which could be put in more heavily into a NATO frame and might make it easier. Previous administration, well, still in power, the Trump administration was not that keen. Anything that went through the EU, obviously, they were definitely not keen on. I think for a Biden administration, it's going to be very, very different. So that's worth keeping in mind, even if the whole Turkey-EU agenda has its own problems. It's worth noting, though, in part because there is such a difference between the European relationship with Turkey, which is in some ways structural and inescapable, even if it's dysfunctional, and the American relationship with Turkey, which, frankly, is optional. For all of the looking at the map and saying, look where Turkey is and look how important it is and all the rest of it, many things are really optional for the two of us. And as Asia Pacific looms larger and larger in the American strategic calculus, maybe not over the next years, but if we look even further ahead, Turkey is a place of importance in a region of decreasing strategic salience, probably for any administration. Doesn't mean we're getting out of the region. There's a mythology about American withdrawal, for sure. But, it does tend to limit this argument that you sometimes hear in Turkey, well, we're simply too important. At the end of the day, the relationship with Ankara is too important to neglect, and cannot be ignored. They can be ignored, actually. But the style will be very different. It won't be as personalized. Ozgur, you spoke about this, I thought, very, very accurately. There was some kind of a relationship there between Erdogan and Trump. It's hard to tell exactly what it is, but in any case, whether they liked each other or they didn't, they at least tended, I think, both of them to see the world, see foreign policy through the lens of leaders and leadership, and less through institutions and other things. And that, I think, will be very different. Now, the second point, I think on some of the key issues, this is going to be a very tough agenda. I mean, the issues have been mentioned already. S-400 is an absolutely critical thing. If we don't find some formula over S-400, there's a bipartisan consensus to start getting very tough on sanctions. I don't think this administration that would be coming in is eager, as Trump might have been, and even talked about this, to kind of do punitive economic harm to Turkey. I don't think they would. This is not their inclination, I think. I think, however, they will look to the defense-industrial relationship. They'll look to other things where sanctions could be applied. And there's a bipartisan consensus, I think, to do that. East Med. I think it was already evident for the Trump administration. It will be even more evident in a Biden administration that this is something of concern. It's also an area where if something were to go wrong, and things could easily go wrong, a la 1996 in Ymir Kardak, you could have a more activist American approach. That was probably unlikely in the Trump administration. But you could have people, perhaps not as eager to intervene as Richard Holbrooke was at the time in 1996, but there are people out of that mold in this incoming administration who could get engaged. Finally, is there any good news here? Is there something that can be done? Well, I think there are some things to say. Some of the things that Biden is likely to try to do will find favor in Ankara. You mentioned some of them, the getting back into the nuclear agreement with Iran, a somewhat less harsh approach to sanctions with Iran, a more political NATO. It's a place where Turkey has a seat at the table. If you pursue that route, that's in Turkey's interests. Different kind of language with regard to the Muslim world. This is rarely mentioned, but Trump had some very harsh style when it came to this kind of question on immigration, on other things. Biden is not likely to have that kind of an approach, and that probably would be more sometimes comforting to Ankara. But at the end of the day, you've got to fix the basic problems: S-400, assertiveness in the Eastern Mediterranean. There are a list of other things. What's the Turkish interest in fixing this? Well, I would say the Turkish interest basically is reassurance in an extremely dangerous set of neighborhoods. Who else is going to provide reassurance and deterrence? You're going to rely simply on Russia to do that over the longer term? Russia is part of the problem, potentially. And so unless you believe that this neighborhood is going to become stable suddenly in Syria or Libya or the Caucasus, that's not going to happen. you need friends, you need NATO, you need the United States, and that's an incentive. And then finally, and I think you hinted at this a bit, Gonul, any administration comes in wanting to fix things. They generally don't want to make things worse. They set themselves tests, in fact, to fix things that they saw as emblematic of what went wrong with their predecessor's policy. Obama, as one of his very first trips, went to Turkey to try to fix what he saw as a failed relationship with Ankara. It may not be at the top of Biden's agenda, but I could well imagine a desire to sort of, fix things if they could with Ankara. So there is a window, I think, for dialogue and to try to do some things differently, but it may not last very long, and we may run into exactly the danger that Ozgur notes at the end of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Kadri, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ian. I will open up very soon for the Q&A. I would like to just remind you to the audience that please use the Q&A function to put your question. We have already received a lot of questions. But before going to the Q&A, Gonul or Ozgur, would you like to reflect on what has been said until now, or we can just go directly to the Q&A?
To Ozgur's point, Kadri, he said that, well, we all have been talking about a scenario where the worst case scenario, but that might not be the case. That was the point that I was trying to make. But it's important to note, I've been following Russian media since elections, and prominent people who are close to the Kremlin, they're striking a different tone now. Some of them are saying, well, actually, a Biden administration could work for us because it would certainly be more predictable. So in the short term, it's going to be nerve-wracking for everyone, for Russia, for Turkey. But in the mid to long term, both parties could find a balance. So I just wanted to underline that. Thanks.
Ozgur?
And Kadri, it seems that Russia will be a focal point of the relationship in the upcoming period. When we talk about Turkey and Russia, we usually talk about the S-400 and Turkey's rapprochement with Russia, which is really, a past story. What we see today is, apart from the United States, Turkey is actually the only NATO ally that's actively drawing red lines to Russia in Syria, in Libya, and now in the South Caucasus. Although, of course, it's a bit nuanced, still there, we see Turkey gaining space from Russia. I think that this will not go unnoticed by the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Ozgur. Well, I will bring the question in this case. Paul Levin is asking, he said, I quote, "I suspect both the Biden administration and the EU would welcome a more cooperative relationship with Turkey. Would it be feasible to see Ankara adopt a more friendly, collaborative posture vis-a-vis the West? And if not, I quote, I don't know, I don't think so, why not?" Who would like to answer this question? Go ahead, Ozgur.
Kadri, you were part of the same meetings last year when I was in Brussels, or was it the former year? I don't remember. But for Turkey, more for more with the EU doesn't mean less for less. Meaning that for Turkey to extract any benefits from the EU, or to take any, for the EU to take any positive steps towards Turkey, actually there's a lot that Turkey has to undo. In domestic politics, including perhaps some constitutional amendments, and the domestic political realities will not allow Turkey to do those. So unfortunately, I do not see a normalization of Turkey-EU relationship anytime in the near future.
Ian, would you like to add something?
Well, I agree with that. But in sitting here in Brussels, it's so clear that the EU agenda with Turkey is so much more broad-based. There's so many more pieces that you can move around to accomplish things, even if it's difficult. With the US, it's very one-dimensional. It's all about the security and defense cooperation in certain critical regions. Are we on the same page or are we not? I think for both Europe as the EU and for the United States, there is a tendency to kind of look beyond the immediate. And this gets a little bit to some of perhaps President Erdogan's anxieties. It's not that anyone wants to see a coup in Turkey, but there is a kind of let's keep the flame alive view that sort of says, well, look, there will be political transitions eventually in Turkey. And, you know, we need to be positioned to have a different kind of relationship if and when that happens. And I think that's part of the equation for both Brussels and for Washington.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question is Nebiye Toksabay is asking, under the new administration, how likely is the formation of a U.S. joint working group on the on the S-400 defense system? A call repeated by the defense minister Unluhisarcikli today. Gonul, go ahead.
I can answer. There's no point. I mean, even people are working for the Trump administrations, the ones that I talked to saw no point in hosting such a working group, because they have been saying, and obviously the Pentagon officials are saying, what's the point? We know what the dangers are, and the Turks must know. So the whole point of hosting this working group from a Turkish standpoint was to drag the process out. So it was a way of spending time not to talk about the contentious issue itself, and Americans are not buying it, even the ones who have worked for the Trump administration. And I doubt a Biden administration is going to be more willing to put together such a working group, which they see completely useless.
If I could just add to that, I think the Biden administration would be much more inclined to take into account the views of NATO allies on this as well, because it's not just a bilateral issue, it's a NATO issue. And the view inside NATO is similarly negative. You know, unless you're really prepared to put something on the table that involves taking the system away or putting it on ice somehow, I don't think you're going to convince people that there are, you know, technically it's not a problem. They shouldn't worry.
Thank you, Ian. Momoko Kidera is asking, how do you think the election results affected or not affected to the Turkish internal politics? Resignation of the Minister Albayrak and possible change, of course, monetary policy. Do you think that the American election really played on that?
Kadri, I can weigh in. No, I mean, we know the reasons of why the minister resigned, and the U.S. elections has nothing to do with it.
Another question from John McCarthy, Halkbank case. Very short question, Halkbank case.
Well, look, I think I don't know if Erdogan is going to dare to ask Biden again, because he asked that question in 2016 and he received a tough answer in which Biden said, look, if I do anything, if I interfere in a court case, you know, I would lose my job. If any president attempted doing that, he would be risking an impeachment. So he was very clear on that. So that means, and we've seen, I don't know how many of you have read the New York Times story, which detailed the extent of Trump administration's effort to go the extra mile to give whatever Erdogan demanded. The Justice Department under Trump administration worked really hard to convince the prosecutors to drop the case in some instances, to go easy, and that didn't happen. So I think Biden administration I don't think it will interfere in the process. This is a court case, and they won't be interfering in the process. So they will let the whole process play out.
Thank you. Very briefly, Ozgur, we have a lot of questions. Go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to say Turkey should start cooperating with the U.S. institutions on these issues, because actually Turkey can have minimal to moderate success if it cooperates with the institutions.
Another question from Urash Ülkü. Don't you think tough cuts the sanction on Turkey would push Turkey closer to Russia? How could then Biden show this is a success to the Senate if Turkey move away from the US and the EU and tighten its relation with Russia?
Well, of course, course, from the Senate's point of view, the success of a Turkish policy is to make sure that Erdogan is punished for this behavior. I think I'm talking about the people on the Hill. There are very few who look at the big picture and say, well, we're doing this, but what if this pushes Turkey further away from the Western alliance? The thinking is not that. I think it's such an emotionally driven policy that many of them say we have to punish Turkey, because remember, this is not just about Turkey. They think about other US allies who are thinking of purchasing S-400, who are thinking of cultivating closer defense ties with Russia. So they think that Turkey, not punishing Turkey, would set a bad example for these other US allies. So they think in those terms, and it's really, but again, as I said in my initial remarks, I think there will be people within the Biden administration who will be making that case, saying that we have to work with Turkey. We can't burn all the bridges. If we do so, this is gonna produce the opposite effect that we want, which is pushing Turkey further away from the Western alliance. There will be people who will be making that case. The question is where Biden stands. And I think that will largely be determined by Turkey's actions from now until then. And again, testing the S-400s recently is really not a good sign.
Thank you, Ozgur and Ian. If you don't have something to add, I will go to the following question. How do you expect the initial conversation between President-elect Biden and President Erdogan to go? What will need to be the key action taken by the US to address ongoing issue with Turkey?
Well, I do think it's important to remember that even though the relationship was sort of highly personalized in a sense under the Trump administration, that this always plays a role. I mean, that, when leaders talk to each other on the phone about things, they tend to like each other or not, like to talk to each other or not. It actually makes a difference. And I can well imagine this not going well. But it also depends upon how the ground is prepared. They don't just do this on the fly. These things tend to be, they should be well prepared in advance. And presidents don't like to come away not having they don't want a conversation that's a failure. And it's usually set up in such a way that it doesn't come out that way. So, I think in order for there to be a successful conversation, there has to at least be some basis for movement on some of the critical issues that are at stake, whether it's S-400, where in fact there are a range of possibilities that don't just involve not testing or not applying sanctions. If they do, there are other kinds of things that you could imagine, and people have been talking about these scenarios. So there are things, I think, if they're willing to put these things on the table, EastMed is a big part of it, because I think in Congress there's going to be big pressure on that, and the administration will be very sensitive to that. Maybe that's an area where Turkey would find it easier to have a moratorium on exploration or something that would help. But otherwise, I find it difficult to imagine that there's going to be a kind of chemistry between the two of them.
Thank you, Ian. Could you, Günther Sofer is asking, could you tell us in which issues and area Turkey and the US share the same interests and see the actual need to contain Russia? Who would like to answer this question? Go ahead, Ozgur.
I think Günther also answered his own question. I think it's Russia. I think Turkey's rapprochement is misunderstood with Russia, is generally misunderstood, and Turkey also misunderstands this. There is a limit to which Turkey can get closer to Russia, and I think that limit was already passed a couple of years ago, and now there is a rollback. So in the future, we won't be talking about, even today, we don't even need to say, Turkey and Russia could be in an active proxy fight in Idlib in months or even weeks, first of all, and Turkey will need reassuring. In Libya, people, there's all this talk of Turkey undermining NATO in Libya, etc. But actually, as a matter of fact, Turkey has contained Russia in Libya for the time being. Russia could decide otherwise, and then Turkey would again need U.S. Reassuring. And then, of course, on the other hand, if President-elect Biden, is really serious about containing Russia, honestly, there are ways to do that without Turkey, but they are much more costly. So there's a lot that Turkey can do. And I think for this reason, I think this is a good starting conversation in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I could also imagine on Iran that there would be a lot of common ground on Iran with regard to the use of sanctions on Iran, with regard especially to the, to containing Iran's nuclear ambitions in a way that aren't destabilizing. I think there we're probably largely on the same page, actually.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Catherine Wallard asking what changed on the Kurdish question in Turkey and beyond? And I will also put this question with the question coming from Menekşe Tokyay. What are your predictions about the potential divergence and avenue of cooperation between Ankara and Biden administration in Syria policy? Gonul, you have touched on, spoke about this issue a bit. Maybe I can start with you. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not going to say anything original, but as you know, President-elect Biden is one of the most pro-Kurdish leaders in Washington, and his close circle has made it clear that he's going to be a lot more engaged in Syria. And of course, engagement in Syria, U.S. engagement in Syria, means that the U.S. will be working more closely with the YPG. Now, that has been happening, but with the Trump administration, Trump, remember, tolerated several Turkish incursions, and that might not be the case under a Biden administration. And there are, I've heard people who work with the Biden team say, we might be pushing Turkey, behind the scenes to sit down with the Kurds and maybe launch another Kurdish opening. There's been obviously a debate, but I really don't see that happening or producing results anyway, because it's all Erdogan's entire domestic political survival strategy rests on the assumption that the more you criminalize the legitimate Kurdish opposition, the better your chances are in terms of securing another term. So I don't think the US has leverage there, but certainly in Syria, the United States will be less tolerant of any Turkish military adventures, particularly in northeastern Syria.
Thank you, Gonul. Well, there's a question from An Moisan to you, Ian. Do you think other NATO allies with a renewed relationship, for instance, Greece, will also put additional pressure on President Biden that pressure Turkey on the East Med, immigration, etc.? We have already spoken about East Med, but we know that the Turkey immigration also is a tool that sometimes is used by Ankara from time to time. So, go ahead.
I mean, it's an interesting question, because I do think that that there will be countries that will seek to go via Washington to increase pressure on Turkey, especially in the East Med. Greece is very well placed to do that. And of course, the US relationship with Greece has become more and more cooperative, deeper in recent years, partly as a hedge to uncertainties with Turkey, partly for independent reasons. So I think that plays a role. It plays a role on Capitol Hill for sure. It always did. But there was in the past always the sense of kind of past going back 20 years when this was a heavy issue, a sense of maintaining a balance in our policy in the region. That desire to maintain a balance per se in its own right is now largely gone, just because of the deterioration of the relationship with Turkey. There's simply much more sympathy for the Greek and the Cypriot position on this than there was. So yeah, I think you could see that. I think you could also see more deliberate discussion between the United States, NATO allies on risk reduction in the Eastern Med, where, I think that's a very useful way to proceed. but also with the EU. And that certainly was not the Trump administration's thing, if I can put it that way. To actually think about the relationship with Turkey as one of the issues on the agenda with the European Union, because, the United States, after all, has a stake in how the migration and border security issue plays out between the EU and Turkey in ways that the Trump administration wasn't very sensitive to. I mean, we have a stake in what this means for European security, but also what it means for European politics in the next years. And that, that will be part of the calculus. I just think it goes back to something Gonul said originally. I think this administration is likely to be much better at kind of connecting the dots between different aspects of foreign policy that bear on relations with Turkey. But it's not just about relations with Turkey. It's all these other pieces, trade, EU policy, NATO affairs, that kind of come together here. Much more systematic approach, probably. So it's a long way of saying, I think, the question is accurate, and I think you are likely to see some of that.
Thank you. Adrian Simeon is asking, after the Nagorno-Karabakh peace agreement, is it clear that Russia imposed the Turkey a red line on this, on its influence in Caucasus? Could this be a turning point on the Russia-Turkey relations and push Erdogan in the arm of his ally? Ozgur, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, first of all, maybe I used the word red line in a wrong way in my previous statement. Of course, it's Turkey and Russia drawing red lines against each other in all three cases. In Idlib, I mean, in Libya, yes, the Russian-backed Haftar could not go further, but neither could the Turkey-backed Sarraj. But I mean, if we're talking about Karabakh, I must say that Turkey is by no means unhappy with the way that the Karabakh war has ended at this phase of the Karabakh war, because Turkey is, well, ally, I guess it's right to say, has gained territory. But I think the most important thing is that Azerbaijan gained the civilian land route from Nakhchivan to Azerbaijan, which means that Turkey also gained the civilian land route to Azerbaijan. These are, I think, important gains for Turkey, and Turkey is by no means unhappy about this outcome.
Thank you. Nurettin Friedi is asking a question. EU is somehow divided between Greece, Cyprus, France, and the Triask sanction and being tough with Turkey, but the majority member states led by Germany favoring a pragmatic approach to avoid a confrontation. So the next US administration will favor which of these two approaches inside the EU? You have already partially answered, but...
Well, yeah, I would agree that there is a spectrum of views inside the European Union about how to respond. There's hardly a spectrum of views on which on sympathies in the problem, I would say. I mean, I am hard put to think of an actor inside the European Union supportive of Turkey's policy in the Eastern Mediterranean. There may be some who are willing to more understanding of the overall kind of Turkish point about whether it's about law of the sea or it's other things, but in terms of the actual policy being pursued, Turkey has no supporters inside the European Union on this. There are, as you say, those who want a more pragmatic approach. I think probably Washington would come down on the side of a more pragmatic approach. I think that's fair to say, because above all, what we want to see is a reduction of tension and reduction of risk, and having the level of brinkmanship lowered to a point where the risk of a military incident is lower. I think that's the U.S. interest above all.
Thank you, Ian. Gonul, I will also ask another question, then you can go and you can answer both together. Follow up on the Halkbank. What about, is from Emre Peker, what about OFAC angle? Biden can't control the judiciary, but will the administration look to moderate the fallout by curbing Treasury action?
Well, I think, again, it will all depend, as I've written elsewhere recently, it will all depend. I think we'll find a Biden administration that's much more willing to work with Turkey than many of us have anticipated. But it will all depend on where Erdogan stands and how much he's willing to make concessions on. So there are, as we have all been saying, the S-400, I think, from the way I see it, is non-negotiable from the US perspective. So Erdogan has to do something on that. So there are hot button issues from the US perspective that the Biden administration is not going to accommodate Turkey, but it could accommodate Turkey if Erdogan is willing to give something in return. And that's not, I mean, on the one hand, I would like to think there are still Chinese and Russian presidents still have not congratulated President-elect Biden, but President Erdogan did after his government said that we will congratulate once the official results are in. That hasn't happened, and he still went ahead and congratulated. So I'd like to think, and maybe Ozgur is better placed to answer this question, I would like to think that at some point they are going to realize that, you know, these are all our conditions, accept it or leave it. This is not going to work with this administration. So they have to understand, they have to realize all the red lines that the new US administration is going to have, and they have to give something in return. And I would like to think that they might be slowly coming to that point, and maybe act more pragmatically. But again, everything, it's going to be a give and take. Everything will depend on how willing Erdogan is in terms of giving concessions.
Ozgur, go ahead.
Very shortly, I think Erdogan's, let's say, timing of congratulating Biden is overinterpreted a little bit, because there are also other European leaders who congratulated Biden around the same dates. I think that if Erdogan was too early in congratulating, probably his concern would be that he feels himself too weak or vulnerable, so he did not want to give that impression. On the other hand, if we waited as much as China or Russia, that would have been interpreted differently. So I think he just chose the safe way and congratulated Biden alongside with most other European leaders. Chose a timing alongside with most other European leaders.
Thank you, Ozgur. I have to really apologize because there are too many questions, and it will be probably impossible to answer to all this question, but maybe as a last question from Niels Lange. Do you think Turkey's participation in the nuclear sharing agreement is in danger? Biden made some comment that he will revisit the stationing of the nuclear bombs in Incirlik.
Well, I think, if I may briefly, I think there is for a long time been anxiety in American defense circles about this on a number of counts. I mean, part of it for all the reasons we've been talking about in terms of the relationship, but part of it also about just simply the lack of utility of these kinds of regionally deployed nuclear forces. But the problem, of course, is that if you do something with Turkey, it's pulling on a string that opens a much larger debate inside NATO about what to do about the tactical nuclear weapons deployed elsewhere inside the alliance. And there are many who would like to get rid of those. Ideally, you want to do it, you know, in some arms control fashion with Russia. It's a big project, and I don't think anybody really wants to start that unless they absolutely are forced to do it. And I don't think we're near that kind of state with Turkey. Obviously, it would send a signal to do it.
And Kadri, if I may, I completely agree with Ian here. There are also technical considerations too, and this has been a debate that's been going on for a while. So I think you first have to understand why they were deployed in the first place, and how we are in a completely different situation at the moment. Deployment of those nuclear weapons were a way of coping with the technological limitations at the time, right? They were before the IBMs, the intercontinental ballistic missiles. But now most of the world is almost within the range of US ballistic missiles. So that's not we live in a different world now. And also partly it was because the goal was to make sure that allies do not get their own nuclear weapons to reassure allies. So there were a lot of considerations, these considerations taken into account before they were deployed. But now the debate that's been going on within the security establishment is that nuclear deployments in Turkey bring the United States really very few benefits. And the main argument there is that there are also like potential dangers, right? There are potential dangers to keeping nuclear weapons in Turkey, because whenever you deploy nuclear weapons on foreign soil, they are vulnerable because they could be vulnerable to sabotage. So there are all these considerations, which is not entirely political, but more technical. And I think that debate is going to be made, and some of these points will be raised by probably people in the Biden administration.
Ozgur, would you like to add something before I have to end the meeting? Well, Gonul, Ian, and Ozgur, thank you so much. Really, it was a great discussion, but we have to end. We have a lot of questions. I have to apologize to our audience, and I would like to thank to our audience also for joining us. It was great. Unfortunately, we couldn't answer there are too many questions. And I would like to also thank to my colleague Annika and Alberto for their help to organize this meeting, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.